Peace. This is the Ask Your Oldhead podcast with Justice Rajee. I'm here with my guest, Brandon Lee. Peace, Brandon.
Peace to you. Great to be here.
All right. How
Thanks
you
for
feeling
having me.
today? Oh, you're welcome. Glad to have you.
For sure.
Cool. So we'll just get started. I always like to give you a chance to give some reverence or respect to somebody you want to give some reverence or respect to before we get started.
This week, I appreciate that. This week has to be to the big homie Nipsey Hussle. You know, God bless him. May he rise in power. So definitely want to recognize him this week for sure.
All right. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's a tough situation. The whole thing about it. It hurts.
Yep.
So, first question I always start with is, can you just give me a standard or a principle, just one, that you try to live by and apply in the way you move through the world?
A principle or a standard?
Yeah, standard.
I try to stick to, hold on, before I just jump on out there, let me think of something worth saying. So I would have to say whatever my principle would be I would say a practice. A practice. It's more broad than just a principle, but a practice. Thich Nhat Hanh, for those who don't know, was nominated by Dr. Martin Luther King for a Nobel Peace Prize. He's a Buddhist monk and brought his practice to the West. And so the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition of Buddhism lately is what's been resonating with me. So I'll say that practice is something that I try to keep in mind in my daily routines and engagements nowadays.
All right. Is there any particular features of that practice that you think are really important to you, or just show up, or would be something just to give people a nugget of like what that means?
Sure. So essentially, if we just broke it down to a simplest form, it would be a practice of returning to one's breath, to just break it down so that whatever we're doing, whatever we're engaging in, we're doing it from a conscious space versus just going through the routines. And that's kind of how mistakes happen. That's how, on certain levels, trauma occurs because we're just not mindful. We're not present in the moment. And so, a daily practice, for example, I had to mute my phone. I would keep an app on my phone, and there's a bell that'll ring maybe twice an hour. And so it's just my practice when I hear that bell or whatever I'm doing, unless I'm driving or something, is just stop what I'm doing, take a few breaths, and usually it allows me to re-engage in what I'm doing in a more focused way.
All right. Is there any particular story or just an anecdote about how you got to the place where you picked this up for yourself?
Sure. There's definitely a story, and it involves my current wife.
Okay.
She's the one who introduced me to the practice. But honestly, I was already, I was raised Christian. So the great thing about the practice is that it doesn't pull you away from whatever you may have been previously doing. It should enhance whatever that should be. And so when I met my wife in graduate school, she was going to a retreat with this Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, that was coming here to his monastery in San Diego. And so she invited me to go. And the way in which she invited me was kind of mafia style, like it's an invitation, but if you decline,
Right. It's right.
I just
had. Yeah. I mean, you can say no if you want to.
If you want to.
I mean,
and so
we all got choices to make.
Being from where I'm from, I picked up on that, and so I accepted. And it was a jump, but it definitely was a journey. I got to, kind of study at his feet, as they say, and I've been doing it for years now.
All right, that's peace. I'm glad you had that, because I think in our community, where Buddhism shows up for folks, I don't know if folks are always plugged in. In terms of even accessing that body of knowledge. You know what I'm saying? I had a friend I grew up with, and their family was Buddhist, and so I was like a little bit exposed to it. And then those of us that grew up at a certain age with the martial arts flicks and all that, like there's a lot of like Buddhist concepts within those movie
Eastern
genres.
philosophy.
You know what I'm saying? Eastern philosophy, those, not all of it, but some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but then you get to a certain point, and it'd be like people don't they might have a lot of commentary about Buddhism, but they don't know nothing about none of it.
There are aspects that are a jump, and for clarity's sake, one needs to know someone like me is an aspirant, which means I haven't taken what in my tradition would be defined mindfulness trainings that would actually, where I would personally consider myself to be a Buddhist. I would say that I'm an aspirant now. So, but with that being said, it wasn't until I got more into my indigenous cultural roots, in Africa, that I began to become more aware and where, Buddhism didn't become such a jump for me. So when I began to just realize, and I don't want to speak for everybody, this is from my personal journey.
That's peace. This your moment.
In my personal journey, I mentioned to my grandma I was trying to, be vegetarian, and she just rolled her eyes because she's 90 something, right? And she's like, okay, I've been doing meat, and now you found something better. But anyway, and I just realized how my ancestors used to live and aspired to live. And when I got more into that, then the practice of Buddhism didn't seem so far. It just, Eastern philosophy, it all kind of just seemed to go together. It just all seemed to meet.
Yeah, and there's definitely the, when one takes the time to study and learn these things, the importance of the present, breath, being mindful of your circumstance, your situation, and what have you. That actually isn't a foreign concept to us. It's something, and it's some of it is stuff that we still were doing, and cloaked under other things or in other ways. And then, so at least as far as my own path and accessing some of that, I studied a fair amount of stuff, because in my undergrad, I had a professor that I really enjoyed her classes, and she taught a lot of the stuff around, like Confucius, and so not just Eastern teachings, and so then merging that with like studying, the Bible and the Quran, these other things, it was like, okay, I see this. There's
some correlations.
Yeah, there's some connections here. So these aren't, maybe what you see on TV, is not what what it is.
These basic tenets, I think you'll find in a lot of our cultures, they just might be expressed differently.
Yeah, yes, sir. So, second one, relationships, broadly defined. Is there something that you understand or do now that you may have done differently when you were a younger man?
Absolutely. I would probably say if I had to narrow it down, there's quite a few things now that I do differently than I would have when I was a younger man, but I try to value, as it relates to relationships, I try to value everyone that comes in my life for whatever reason or however amount of time it is, whereas before, it was more results oriented. I'm trying to get to where I'm trying to get to. And, just the mentality and the times then, a lot of it was just different. But nowadays, I try to, being present in the moment, I try to value whatever lesson, whatever, with whoever I'm engaged with, and try to take from it whatever is trying, being delivered to me. And so I just try to be more mindful in my engagements nowadays, whereas before, I was just in a completely different mindset, and I'll leave that part there.
Leave that there.
I'll just leave that there. There's been some evolution.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, if I can, I'm gonna reflect back, and you let me know if I'm on the right path.
You got it.
It sounds like definitely the piece that you're important because of what you can help me do. Maybe more so, you're important just because you're important. If I'm on the path, let me know if I'm on the path. Word up.
You're on the path, and between and honestly, just in regards to the subject matter that we talk about, when you're between the ages of say just 16 and 25, there's just different pressures, So whether you're trying to survive a situation, whether you're trying to, whether you're the only black kid in an all white college, or so depending on what the circumstances are, I've just finally been blessed to get to a stage in life to where I'm able to take a moment, So part of it was me, tripping. And then the other part was, I just had to get through those moments. Yeah. So, it was a blessing and a curse. But, I'm here to tell the story. And the main thing is that I learned something from it. And, I'm trying to be better every day.
Indeed. And I think we all, think we all. I mean, at least with developmental psychology will tell you that we all in that. In one, it doesn't stop. You keep having developmental stages as you age.
Preach.
But in that early part of your life, you can, depending on whatever your circumstances are, you can make a lot of choices that seem like the best choices and the only choices. I mean, then later you go, oh man, I had all these other choices. I didn't know about those choices. You know what I mean? And that's the nature of it. I think. The hope is that you get through that time and you get to the next phase, and hopefully not too scarred, as I like to say.
Right, exactly. Eloquently stated.
All right. So, third question, and then we'll meander a little bit. Once we get through this one. What's just something that's really important for you right now in your life? Just like something that's really important and present.
That's a great question. I would say one thing that's ever present is a family. I'm fairly new father. I've got a 6-year-old, 3-year-old twins. My wife. It's just us out here in the Pacific Northwest. So, we ride together. So that's my unit. So everything evolves around them. And then second is my book. I just wrote a book. Excuse me. I haven't just written a book, but I did a second edition to the book. Oh. And so I've been knee deep in edits for the past, quarter, month or two. And so that's what's ever present on my mind. I can't wait for this process to be done this spring so I can celebrate it.
So tell me a little bit about about the book.
So the book
folks should know what you're doing. They should know what you're working with.
I appreciate it. The title of the book is Best Practices in Community Conscious Policing, a reflection on law enforcement community building workshops. So I first wrote the book in 2016, shortly after the state of emergency in Ferguson, Missouri. Those may remember when Michael Brown was killed by an officer there in St. Louis, and national protests that erupted since then. And so this was the book was my response. And since then, I've been able to kind of go around the country, glean best practices from all types of different perspectives, and then bring it together in this educational resource. So I'm extremely happy about it, but I've been working on it for some time. So,
all right. Now I know you do some training and consulting around that work. Is there anything going through the process of writing the book, getting it out into the world, but then also the consulting and other work that goes with it? Is there anything that you learned in that process that you that surprised you?
Yes, a lot of surprises. And that's why I think I try to grow in compassion every day, because I don't know it all. The more that I learn, I realize the more I don't know. So when I first began this journey, I was, I'm someone who has won a lawsuit against the police for police misconduct. I've worked as an advocate, as the NAACP Legal Redress Chairman. But I've also, lately worked with law enforcement who are really working their hardest, to do their best under pressure circumstances. And so learning from different lenses, speaking to mothers who have lost, kids, perspectives we don't often hear, whether it's from community members who identify as trans or non-binary, stories that don't make it to the papers, researching the book and even seeing, speaking about men and patriarchy and healthy masculinity, the difficulty to find the research on how many women, depending on their background, which race or women, how to find out how many of them have been impacted or killed by law enforcement. So even the statistics, you can see bias. Yeah. And so, I've learned an incredible amount, and that's why I kind of felt the need to follow through with the story and to get it published.
All right. Is there any particular, like a nugget maybe you could share just from, some of the work that maybe like a teaser, so to speak, to give people to follow up? Because I always encourage people is you want to learn more, go buy the whole book and read it. But maybe a nugget or a thought, something that you would want to share about the process or about what's in there.
I think the main thing that the book culminates first is it's told, even though it's an educational resource, it's told from the perspective of a community member with lived experience of being racially profiled, but also the educational professional experience to kind of evaluate it. And so I think it begins with the real life experience of me being an educator at a university and there being a hate crime on campus.
Okay.
And the hate crime occurring during the time when there were all of these different videos of folks being killed, right, on camera. And so the trauma that activated from that. And so it's a real life story, but it culminates in recommendations. And that's the cool part about it. So whether your thing is legislation, whether it's research, whatever your connection is to this theme of police community relations, I think there's going to be something in here for you to help you do your job a little bit even better.
All right. So, in my experience, one of the most challenging area issues around working is probably the last one on this particular subject. We'll move to some other things. Is because there's a difference between like talking about and like advocating the point on a particular social issue, right? Like wanting to make sure something gets acknowledged, right? It's different than changing a practice or the way stuff happens, right? And I find, and you let me know if you've ever experienced this, that sometimes when you're moving in these circles, you find where folks, and not unjustly or wrongly, they're in this advocacy part where it's like I just want people to know and be aware, right? And then there's a conflict with the like, well, what do we do part over here, this practice part, and how we're going to change it. Or what should we do differently, or then other things you learn when you're trying to change practice, right? And I think that's something that mushrooms out into other parts of our lives. That's why I always try to bring it up. Is there any nuggets that you could share about how you would encourage people to embrace the advocacy piece, but start to tap into that what do we do practice-wise piece? Is there anything you can think of?
Absolutely. So it's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. So I would say the best thing that we support folks to do is reevaluate their approach to problem solving. So how we used to solve problems back in the day, it just doesn't. So for example, motivation. If I wanted someone to, let's say, build cars faster, they put doors on a car, and I want them to do it faster so I can get more cars. Then I incentivize them with more money. That works. But if I want them to solve a problem like racism or global warming, or an answer that needs to be created, then that same level of motivation is going to narrow their focus, and they're going to actually probably do the job slower. And so this is Daniel P. You can go find it. So we try to help folks change their approach to problem solving. So right now, everything is intellectual. And what we have found through our training is that that's not where a shift takes place. And so that's why we inserted conscious, for example, using community conscious policing. So the conscious space is where we decide what's right and wrong. That's where we become motivated to make a shift. And that is only the really space where something like that will be sustained. And so we can go deeper into that, but that's the difference. We don't take an intellectual approach to try to change someone's thinking like implicit bias, because it's been proven that doesn't correlate to someone's behavior. Only in a conscious space will that shift take place.
Man, peace. Oh, so Pacific Northwest, you're still relatively new to this part of the country.
Still paying dues.
Yeah. Is there something that you, like being here, that maybe made you think differently about other places that you've been, or something that you might have missed at other places, in that level? Like, since you've been here, you're like, wow, I didn't think about that then. Like, anything that generates there.
I will say that there's aspects of the Pacific Northwest that I appreciate that, when I go other places, I notice, and it can be basic, right? Just like my tap water. Got really good tap water at my house. I don't have a really large home, but I've got 3 trees back, 3, 4 huge trees. So I mean, my air is fresh. So, there are things that I notice for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as what I appreciate about being here is it's just my nuclear family,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm someone who grew up with my grandparents 3 or 4 generations around, and that's a beautiful thing, and I want that for my children. But we've really had to establish roots here, and we've really had to reach out to folks like you, other families who have held us down, and so I didn't really know it before coming here, but this is a place where you're going to sink or to swim. And we've been fortunate enough to be swimming, so far. So
yes, sir. Yeah, I think it's I think it's, I know you've had more moves, I think, from us talking in the past. In terms, I went New Jersey, Pittsburgh to here. I just jumped. I did one did a skipper, skipped the rock.
Right,
did 300 miles, then I just jumped all that, everything else. But it is something I think about sometimes in terms of just the way, because there's some things and facets of being black that are like, okay, like, yeah, it's black people do this, black people do that. Like, okay, that's pretty common. Like, we're on the same page. And then there's nuance, and there's different flavors, different approaches. And every place I've lived in the United States and other places that I've visited, they all have their unique style. And part of my joy or fun about doing this here is, I get to talk to sometimes folks that are from here, and I get to talk to people that are here that are aren't from here, and the feeling of sort of the distance from the rest of the country, and
isolation.
I mean that it gets hard to not be aware of it. You know what I mean, and so I always think, even while it's a beautiful state physically, you get like that, like, hey, it is actually like, yeah, it's like 800 miles to the Bay Area. Like, Seattle's only 150, but that's like, it's like if Seattle, we're close. Seattle's closest neighbor, Portland, and they're like, we are each other's closest kind of bigger city area. What would be, as a person that has made a lot of transitions, what would you think would be something that you would impart to someone else as just a lesson or something to take with you so that you can transition better?
So it's a great question. I've traveled, so I'm from the Bay, but so everyone probably has seen by now The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That's how I sum up my story. I started in Oakland. I moved when I was 16 to the Woodlands, Texas, right outside of Houston, with my aunt and uncle, 2 younger cousins, etc. And from there, I studied Spanish. So I traveled to Spain, Cuba, Mexico, lived with families there, Puerto Rico, Japan. I didn't stay there, but I visited. And then in the States, teaching at Oregon State University, University of Delaware, University of San Diego, and Portland Community College. So Oregon is unique in the sense that in everywhere I've gone in the country, I've been able to have a quote-unquote black connection. I'm in historically black fraternities. I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, the Order of Prince Hall Freemasonry. So the beautiful thing is those rites of passage that exist before us is where I've been able to plug in wherever I go. And so that's the beautiful thing. And the Kappa Alpha Psi in particular was founded in Indiana, where it was 33% registered Klan members. So it's spaces like this where we've learned to thrive. So that's been helpful. But the Pacific Northwest is different because we're in such a minority. And then Oregon having the element of state-based discrimination. When you go back to Vanport and the history behind it, there is such an isolation here, and such a competition here, that what I would say is, if you study the data on happiness, and if you expect to come here to a place that rains as much as it does compared to someone like me from California that is, doesn't have as many sunny days as I'm used to coming from California, you have to consider the weather, but more importantly, utilizing technology to maintain those bonds that have helped you get to where you are. So, using your phone, not for necessarily the Facebook, but the social media that might cause you depression when it's dark outside at 5 o'clock, but using it to FaceTime with some folks back home to give you that genuine connection that you might not otherwise get. Because it may be, you know how it is when it gets dark, man. You might not see your neighbor for 3-4 months.
Yeah, no,
it gets real.
It gets the.
But the snow is good, and I love to ski, so sometimes it's worth it. You know?
I didn't get to go. We usually go at least once or twice with the cross country. I don't do the downhill. You do the downhill thing? What you
hardcore if you do cross country.
You hardcore if you're doing that downhill. That terrifies me, man. I'm good.
Oh, I'm up there.
Oh, man, good for you. I did the snowboarding once, and I was like, I could come back up here and do this one again. But the downhill skiing, it's the stopping. You know what I'm saying? I got a lot of momentum. I'm a big man. You know what I'm saying? Like,
the one thing I can guarantee you, you're going to stop.
Oh, I know.
It's just a matter of when and how.
Listen, so we do the little teacup, which is near Mount Hood Meadows with the cross country, and there's a little hill that's like a little zip. And my son we go in there. My son, he's happy. Right. He's like, yay! I did it one time. Like, I will never do this again. I just, because I was coming around, I was like, I wasn't sure how I was going to turn, and they're like, oh, well, lean like this on the skates, right. And I was like, oh, that's going to work, man. And and then I realized you really got to trust it. You really got to lean into it, because if you half lean into it, it don't work. You know what I mean? Which is like a life lesson there. There's a life lesson there.
And skiing, I'm a swimmer too. In those sports, there's just no, that's right, it's going to trim the fat when it comes to that breath or skiing. That's right. It's either all the way or no way.
I didn't know you could swim. I like to swim. I was what do you call it? I basically swam, like we had pools in the town I grew up in. And so we had little like swim teams. And I swam at least till the pool closed. When I was like 12, the pool closed. So I have a team no more. But up till then, I was out here. I got, gills, breaststroke, freestyle, all that.
Man, I think that's a beautiful thing for our young kids coming up. I wish there was more opportunities for them to learn how to swim.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Word up. One other Pacific Northwest question. We're doing on time. All right, good money. You talked about the water, about the breath. Oh, okay, wait. Now I remember what it was. Connecting, right, and using technology, because I think that's something that we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
The same way, and I when we were talking earlier about the videos, and every time something violent happens that people share it.
That's right.
I cringe at that, because I feel like it's like we're supporting our own sort of negative,
mm-hmm.
like we're feeding ourselves this negativity
mm-hmm.
back. I mean, on the I'm letting everybody know to make sure they see it,
mm-hmm.
right? But then it's like, you really probably, if you just told me what happened,
right,
I ain't need to see it, man.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I saw it once. I don't want to see it 3-4
mm-hmm.
times. Is there anything that you would like to see that you think could, in terms of using technology, using tools like these, that we could use to build more community with each other, especially as Black men? Like, how can we? Because, like, I mean, you spoke to, like, you're a part of a couple different Right to Passage kind of structured
mm-hmm.
networks, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're people relationship based networks,
mm-hmm.
But I always worry that some of our network systems aren't keeping up.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, so I would like your thought, and then we'll have another backup question.
No, it's a great question. I actually think so. I'm kind of like the young dude in the old clique. So in all of wherever I've lived, I've always been the young cat with the older guys.
Okay.
And it's good and bad that comes with that, I guess. But I'm saying that because technology is something that we definitely have to incorporate. I just got this little commercial break. I'm not going to forget the question. I just came back from Atlanta.
Okay.
Celebrating our 20th anniversary, initiating the Cap Alpha side with my line brothers. And the first day there, just recognizing all the beautiful Black people and the ways in which we express ourselves and the different levels in which it was just a wonderful, setting to be in after being in the Pacific Northwest for a few years. But the first conversation I had was with the engineer talking about smart cities and our cars and how they're going to be able to build sensors so the cars can talk to each other. So Tesla right now, you know, you can, it's its own car, but now they'll be able to talk to each other. The light will be able to talk to it, and won't need all these beautiful things. When we don't have to worry about racism and the isolation keeping us away, and just our mental health, and when we don't have to spend so much time focusing on the trauma and this and that, those are the things that emerge, all of this beautiful futuristic opportunity. And it was like, man, how much time am I spending on all of this just trying to survive out here, kind of being isolated, and what would I be doing with that time if I was somewhere else where I really wasn't so pressing? So it was just a mental note. And but in regards to technology and relationships, quite honestly, I think it gets in the way. So what I mean by that is when I see my younger brothers coming up who are more tech savvy, I didn't get to go to YouTube and press play. I had to go read those books. When I came up, you couldn't just go ask an old head with respect, you know, using your name, an old head, and just say, yo, can I read that book? You had to go to that person's house, probably have dinner with them, and read the book at their house. They wasn't just going to let you go. And from there, you had to build with it. If you had an engagement with somebody, the next time you saw that person, they expected you to retain that and have something to add to it. So quite honestly, I think that it's more of a how do we provide times and spaces where we can just convene without the technology and just see what emerges.
Word. I like that. I'm just going to let that ride because I'm with that. I think it's man. Yeah, I think I guess we'll add one thing. Is because something that's been on my mind is what are ways that we could create, you know, the concept or the space of sanctuary. You know what I mean? Like what you know, because sometimes in our community, and sometimes depending on our our relationship to some of our traditional religious institutions. Even if some of us may be adherents to some of those values, like we may not go to the church, we may not go to the mosque, we may not go to the temple, we may not go to the ciphers, but we still hold these values. And then we have these other places that become de facto sort of like this is our place to be with myself or be with mine. So it's a bar or it's a certain restaurant or a certain, you know what I mean, or maybe it's a relative's house. You know what I mean? They go to grandma's house, you can always go to her house and just be chilling. You know what I mean? But what is a way that we can ensure we're intentional about, like, you know, this is a spot where, you know, you need some quiet and you want to be with a brother, be with some brothers or whatever, or some sisters or whoever, you can go here and you can be there and you know what I mean, deal with your thoughts or be quiet, do nothing. As another say, you know what I mean? And like it's just a nugget that I want to make sure it's out there for people to be mindful about, because I think that to me reflects in what you're saying, what you added on there is that not to mistake sharing time with people for like connecting with people. I guess maybe my other hat on.
Eloquently stated.
Word up. So I'm gonna get us out of here on this. And this the question I've been in the question for the last couple of episodes. Can you think of either, you know, maybe something from movies or music, but something that maybe you felt one way about it, you know, when you saw it when you were younger in the past, and that could be the recent past, and now looking at it now, you go, that, you know, either maybe it's something's different about it or something, the way it hits you is different than you remember when you saw it the first time.
That's a great for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about religion,
rock and roll,
or politics.
Okay.
I'll take something. You know, what really was on my heart this week was Nipsey. Man, being from California, you know, I didn't know him. I'm not from LA. I'm from Oakland. But that was heavy on my chest, you know, and the world, you know, this week. And it was a blessing being an entrepreneur because I was able to just shut down that day, you know, tune into the celebration and just kind of pay my own personal respect. So, you know, for our generation, at least for me, it was Pac. It was Tupac, you know, Tupac and Biggie. And so that's the close thing that I could relate. And what someone like Tupac meant, you know, so for someone like me coming up out of Oakland, even though I came from way more privileged circumstances than he did, he still spoke to a struggle that I could identify with, coming from where he came from and me coming under some big homies that he had. You know, there were some things that definitely weren't in alignment. And so, you know, the way I felt, you know, just maybe using Tupac as a symbol, whatever he meant or stood for, you know, for those who are listening, I have different perspectives as I get older. You know, they're all positive, but they just, you know, on deeper levels. And someone like Nipsey just kind of, you know, Pac had a vision and was doing a lot. And this from my humble perspective, because everybody has their connection that I want to respect. But it was so tragic because, number one, we didn't get to have a public celebration of his life. And even though they had a private one, and he didn't quite get to his mission as those closest to him spoke about it. Nipsey was living his. And so it just put some perspective. And I felt like, even though it's tragic, it demonstrated some progress. So I'll just kind of leave that there.
Word. Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man. It's always a pleasure to build. And last thing I definitely want to say is, on a personal note, your family has been very supportive of mine and you know, our struggle to make the Pacific Northwest work. And like I said, we've been swimming, not sinking, and it's because of brothers like you. And just keep doing what you're doing. And I just want to tell you thank you, man.
Oh, man, we gotta be up in here blubbering, man. We was talking about that earlier. You get me up in here with the stream. So appreciate it. I mean, as I would say, I would want someone to share the way, you know, I try to share the way I would want somebody to share with me. And you know, but that's a whole deeper concept. And so I'm gonna just say two things. One, thank you for joining me, Brandon. I appreciate you. I appreciate your wisdom and what you came to add on. And also let you know, I'd love to have you on again. Yeah, that's part of the love of the show, is to get you back on another time, and we can maybe meander some of them deeper concepts in a future episode.
Whatever I can do. If you want to find out more, T4TSavesLives.com. Appreciate you having me, loved one.
All right. Peace. This has been the Ask Your Oldhead podcast with Justice Rajee. Thank you for listening. Peace.